organization of international business. As firms would now expand internationally or globally, strategy alone is not enough. So in our last discussion, we focused on what a strategy is and how these strategies are crafted for our companies to be competitive. However, in this chapter, we emphasize that when companies decide to go global, strategy alone is not enough. So it's also important for the organization to consider whether the organization is structured well for it to be ready for the challenges it might face in the global market. What else? The company should also consider how they will be able to control operations across countries. It can be very tempting because of having a bigger market, but once we're there, it might get overwhelming. We might miss out on important aspects in terms of controlling our operations across countries. We don't want things to get out of hand and eventually lose our business because of that. What else? We also have to consider building a shared culture. So in chapter 4, we saw how influential culture is when it comes now to how we run a business. So if we decide to go global, we have to emphasize the importance of having a shared culture. Meaning, despite differences in culture across the world, it's still important that wherever we operate, those who work with us should understand that there's this so-called shared culture. And also, if we decide to go global, it is important for us to consider that change is inevitable. We cannot stop change. We cannot avoid change, and therefore, the best thing we can do is really to adapt to change. So those are the things that we consider the moment that we decide to go global. So it's not just really a matter of crafting and implementing strategies. So, in terms of structuring the organization, it is important for us to remember that an organization, an organization is not the same, okay, in all businesses. It may be different because of the nature of the goods and services we offer. It may be different because of the size of the business. It may be different because, let's say, of the influence of culture. It may be different because of how much tasks are expected to be accomplished, and many other reasons why we have to consider how the organization must be structured. So the importance of organizational structure is that it defines who reports to whom. So it's clear who is the superior, who's the subordinate. If I'm a subordinate, to whom do I report to? Okay, because it's possible that I don't report only to one person, but several persons, for instance. Organizational structure also defines how decisions are made, where decisions come from. Okay, and if decision making is decentralized or centralized. It all depends now on the structure of the organization. And then, organizational structure also defines how tasks are divided. So just by looking at the organizational structure, you would know how the organization operates. So, for example, well, I am certain that when you had your SOCORN, one of the tasks given to you by your SOCORN facilitator was to look at SBAA's organizational chart. I'm not sure if you went as far as looking at the entire university's organizational chart, but just by looking at that, you would know now how the organization is structured. At least you would know, or you know how the school is structured. So you know who we report to. So for example, based on our organizational chart, I report to Sir John because he is my dean, and because I'm the program chair, the teachers under the business administration program report to me. So when it comes to decision making, though UB practices decentralized decision making in some aspects, generally it's still centralized, meaning most of the decisions made in the organization are still made by the top level management. But for school-related issues, okay, we are free to make decisions on that matter. And if they are program-related issues, like if it's issues related to business administration program, for example, then it's expected that the decision would come from my level, of course, with the approval of the school dean. So that's how we look at organizational structure. Now, there are different types of organizational structure, and we're not really going to dwell on this because I am 101% sure that if you've already finished your A Management 2, whoever your teacher was, you already were able to come across this topic. Okay, so it's nothing really new, unless, of course, you have not really finished A Management 2 yet. But even if you have not finished Management 2, if your background from senior high is ABM, you probably have come across this in organization and management. So that's the reason why we're not really going to dwell on this. Instead, we're going to see more or less what the structures are, how do you call this? Or when the structures are applicable and when it is not applicable. So the first on our list of organizational structures, we have your functional structure. Okay, so imagine an organization where it is divided, for example, into different functions. Like there's a marketing department, there is a finance department, there is manufacturing department. If that is the kind of organization that you have, then most likely your organization adopts what we call a functional structure. Okay, so usually we see that in these kinds of organization, there is a manager for the marketing function, there's a manager for the finance function, or there is a department head, for example, or I don't know how this different organizations may call them, but usually, yeah, it's manager or vice president. So you might have heard of vice president for marketing, vice president for research. And that is because that institution is adopting what we call now a functional structure. So if it is a small and local firm, meaning domestic operations, functional structure would be good. But if it's already a global firm, it may not really be a good strategy to adopt what we call a functional structure. Ma'am, but even if we go global, we will still be following the same structure. There will still be marketing, finance, etc. Yeah, but then again, since it's already global operations, maybe a different structure would be more appropriate. So again, it may work best for small companies with domestic operations, but it might be considered a weak strategy to adopt a functional structure if the company has global operations. And then we have the divisional structure. When we say divisional structure, just like the term implies, it is possible that your organization is divided into divisions. So let's say, for example, there are divisions that are based on the product. There are divisions that's based on geographic location. So, for example, when we say division, okay, so for example, product division. So the organization, for example, is divided into several different divisions depending on the types of goods and services that you offer. So let's say, for example, if your company offers several products, expect, of course, that there will be several divisions. Okay, that there will be several divisions. So, for example, let's say, for example, if the company is like San Miguel Corporation, which has several types of goods and services offered, then expect that the company has several divisions. So, for example, there's division for food and beverage, there's division for construction, for real estate, for banking, okay, and many other possible divisions that the company may have because of its nature of operations. Okay, so it is divided into several product divisions. And then each division, you will see there, for example, the different companies under San Miguel Corporation. So that is the structure. So for example, for San Miguel Corporation, just to give you an example, no, so it's divided into, let's say, there's division for beverages. So under the beverage division, you have San Miguel Brewery and all its subsidiaries, including those companies that make bottles for San Miguel Brewery. You also have San Miguel Brewing International, which is in charge of manufacturing and selling San Miguel beer outside the Philippines. And then another company under the beverages division would be Ginebra San Miguel Incorporated. Oh, and then let's say there's food division under San Miguel Corporation. So you have San Miguel Pure Foods. So all products related to Pure Foods or San Miguel Pure Foods are under the food division of San Miguel Corporation. And then let's say, for instance, infrastructure division. So San Miguel is also into construction. So there's the so-called infrastructure division. So under that, you have San Miguel Holdings Corporation, and other businesses related to San Miguel Holdings are classified under this category. So, for example, if you're familiar with the businesses of San Miguel under infrastructure division, let's say, for example, they have Manila North Harbor Port. So they're in charge of managing the Manila North Harbor Port. Also under the infrastructure division of San Miguel Corporation is Cypress Tree Capital Investments and all its subsidiaries. And then there's also Transair Development Holdings. Yun. Transair. Sure na ako doon. Transair Development Holdings under infrastructure. And then they may have also what we call other assets and investments. So under other assets and investments, for example, they have San Miguel Properties. It's called San Miguel Properties Incorporated and all its other subsidiaries, which will now include the Bank of Commerce. So you probably have heard of Bank of Commerce. You probably have seen Bank of Commerce somewhere. And then they have also the packaging division. So they also manufacture packaging for different products. And under this, they have actually partnership with a Japanese company, okay? Yamamura Packaging Corporation. So under San Miguel Yamamura Packaging and other Yamamura subsidiaries, if you're familiar with Northern Cement, so Northern Cement is also under San Miguel Corporation, specifically under their packaging division, specifically that which they have partnership with Yamamura Incorporated. So that's product division. And this is applicable to big companies. Like San Miguel Corporation is a very big company. So product division or the divisional structure can be applicable. Okay. And then there's also the geographic division. So this means that the company probably is operating in different geographical area. So for example, if your company has operations in Asia, in North America, in Europe, okay, then that would be a good option, meaning to have what we call a divisional structure. Divisional structure, specifically geographic. So you may probably appoint a vice president for Asia operations, vice president for North America operations, vice president for European operations, something like that. So it's divided into several divisions based on geographical location of operation. So for example, Jollibee, okay, it has several divisions because it's located in different regions in the Philippines. But other than that, because Jollibee went global, it is also applicable to Jollibee, or the geographic division is also applicable to Jollibee because they operate in different geographical locations. So they have operations within Asia, they have operations within North America, etc. So this can work for Jollibee Foods Corporation. So we have discussed functional structure, divisional structure. The next structure is global matrix structure. People may find this a bit confusing and quite difficult to understand, but this would actually work best for very big companies where people are expected to report not only to one person, but probably more than that. So for example, when we talk about a global matrix structure, this will now combine product and geography. So in number 2, we discussed about divisional. So as I've said, the company may be structured according to product division or geographic division. For global matrix structure, it's a combination of both. So this will now clarify the reporting structure also of people. So for example, product manager and regional manager. So what if I'm the product manager of beverages for X company? So who do I report to? I'm from the Philippines. So I probably report to the regional manager in charge of Asian operations. Or let's say, for example, I work for Y company and I am the let's say I am the vice president for, let's say, food. Okay, yung food na product ng company, let's say the food division. So if I am, sorry, if I am the not vice president, if I'm the food manager or the manager for the food division, then to whom do I report to? To whom do I report to? Most likely, I am reporting now to the manager in charge of that region where we operate. So, for example, if that is located in the United States, then I am reporting to the manager of the North America operation. So that's global matrix structure. Anyway, there are illustrations in the PowerPoint presentation, or I mean in the slide deck, so you can just check how global matrix structure works. The main advantage of a global matrix structure is that it is flexible. However, as I've said, because of the many factors that make up the structure, it can be a bit confusing and to some extent may even cause conflict in the organization. So we now move on to control systems and incentives. So in terms of control systems and incentives, okay, in terms of control systems and incentives, it's important for the company to clarify the core components of organizational structure that will help align employee behavior with strategic goals. So for example, when we talk about control systems, this actually help measure performance. So this may be diagnostic or interactive in nature. And then incentives, on the other hand, are those that are used to reward behaviors. So when we talk about rewards, rewards can be financial or non-financial. Operating globally can be very challenging because of how big or how wide the operations will be. And so it may be a bit more difficult to expect our employees to act according to company goals. There will be a lot of factors that may now influence how people behave or how people would act. Therefore, it will be beneficial for you as the owner of the business to craft no strategies related now to control systems and incentives. So let's discuss briefly what are the different types of control systems. So again, this part, okay, you itong control systems and incentives, you probably have discussed this in E-Management 2 specifically, where you discuss compensation and rewards, and also on that chapter where you discuss employee discipline. Okay, it just so happened that this topic is also part of this chapter, but I hope you still remember what your E-Management 2 teacher taught you under compensation and rewards, and also employee discipline. All right, so under types of control systems, there is what we call personal controls. Okay, personal controls. And this would work well in small teams. It's easier to manage a small group. And personal controls can work well if you're working with fewer people. Working with fewer people allows you to have face-to-face interaction. Ma'am, are there instances wherein people don't really see face-to-face? Why are you even emphasizing face-to-face interaction? My answer there is yes. You don't really see some people in the company on a daily basis, especially for bigger organizations. That's why for personal controls, this can only be applicable when you're working with small teams. And then there's also what we call bureaucratic control. Okay, bureaucratic control. So usually when we talk about a bureaucratic control system, we're probably looking at a company where everything is centralized. So for example, in terms of designing rules, policies, procedures, okay, that might be done by one office only in your big company and implemented also by a specific part of the organization. So, for example, rules when it comes now to, let's say, attendance. So, of course, those rules are designed by the organization to make sure that employees attend to their work as regularly as expected. And then if you failed to do that, then there should be a corresponding, not naman punishment, but maybe let's just say there should be a way also to correct, let's say, um, negative behaviors. Okay, and these are usually implemented across the organization. So that's what we refer to as bureaucratic control. So this may work well for bigger organizations. Another would be financial reporting systems. That's you're operating global. Okay, you're operating globally. You're operating in many different countries. There must be a way for the headquarters to understand the situation in different branches across the globe. So for control purposes, it's possible that the organization now designs a specific financial reporting system which all branches across the world would have to use. Okay? And then we also have output controls. Okay? We also have output controls. So for example, for output controls, there should be a way for us to somehow encourage our people to work together and really exert effort so that they will be able to meet sales targets, for them to meet profit targets. So what do we normally offer them so that they will be able to do this? We offer them incentives. We offer them commissions. We offer them rewards. So for example, if the sales target would be 1 million units a month, if your people were able to meet that 1 million unit quota, then if it's the policy of the organization to reward them or give them incentives for being able to meet the desired amount of sales, okay, then so be it, no? Or it might be a different computation if they went beyond the sales target. So for example, the sales target is 1 million. There's a certain amount of reward if they meet 1 million, and there's also a different level of reward if they exceed 1 million units 1 million units of that particular product sold. Or it could be based on profit target. Let's say you have a or let's say you announced to your employees that for 2026 our profit target is $1 million. So if they were able to meet a profit of $1 million, then they are going to be rewarded for that. Okay, sometimes rewards really work. Sometimes rewards can push people to do better, but it's not a guarantee. Okay, it's not a guarantee. And sometimes it would even be the cause of problems in the organization because some people might just, cheat, okay, or might do something illegal just to make it appear that they were able to meet targets even when they did not. They might end up cheating on the reports just to get the rewards, but they did not really meet targets set, no, for them. And then there's also cultural controls, which is really very important, especially if you decide to operate globally. Remember, the moment you start operating beyond your home country, expect that there will be a lot of differences when it comes now to values and norms. We've mentioned some before in our discussions. Like, for example, the attitude of people towards time, the attitude of people towards work itself. Of course, there's education, there's religion, okay, and many other factors that may now influence their values and norms. And you cannot just say, well, when just allow them to do whatever they want to do because anyway we recognize the differences. While that can be a good strategy, it is still important that somehow there's control somewhere so that we cannot always use that later on as an excuse for our infractions. Like, well, okay, you're late again. Oh, I'm late because in our culture we do this, we do that, etc., etc. And you don't want your people to just keep citing culture as a reason for their shortcomings or for their infractions. And then we also have incentives. As I've said, sometimes it's easier for people to accomplish what you ask them to accomplish when they are given incentives. So this motivate employees to perform well or to perform better. So what do we do? What do we give? We give bonuses. We ensure promotions, especially among people who are qualified to be promoted to higher positions. And then we have also recognition. So this is where monetary and non-monetary rewards may come in because Sometimes some companies recognize their employees and just give them, let's say, for example, a plaque for a good performance, or maybe a certificate for good performance, or maybe a personalized ball pen for good performance. Okay. Or maybe they recognize you by posting your picture on the office wall saying you're the employee of the month or employee of the year. That's non-monetary, but it's still a form of recognition. It's still a reward. Okay. So those incentives can help employees be more motivated. So for example, for Banco de Oro uses performance-based bonuses. So depending on your performance as an individual, depending on the work that you are assigned to, you get bonuses. So sometimes when you go, meron ding sales targets, for example. That's why when you go to Banco de Oro, for example, let's say your only intention of going to Banco de Oro is to get the money that your parents sent you from abroad. You really maybe what you just have is the cash card of Banco de Oro, which does not really require you to open and deposit, but you use it to redeem whatever remittances that your parents send you, for example. And in one of your visits to Banco de Oro, the person that you approached, okay, after your transaction will already start asking, oh, maybe you want to avail of this service, maybe you want to avail of this product. Instead of using your cash card, why don't you apply for a debit card instead, because it has more benefits and so on and so forth. So why would they even do that? It's because they are always given sales targets. Okay, they have their own performance-based bonuses. So if they're able to convince you, for example, to shift from your regular cash card to a debit card, okay, that's equivalent to a certain number of points. The more people they convince to sign up for whatever services BDO offers, then they're given incentives. Okay. However, the problem on giving incentives, especially if we're talking about global operations, is that there might be a problem in terms of aligning incentives across countries. Remember, different cultures value rewards differently. So while some of us will be very happy with monetary rewards, others might not find that enough. Some would probably say, I'm not after the money, I'm after recognition. Or you may be recognized, but you're not given monetary incentives. And you'll say, well, I'm glad they recognize me, but I prefer if I were given cash reward, something like that. So we cannot really please everyone. Okay, we cannot really please everyone. So others will probably be given watch. Like in the University of Baguio, for example, for service awardees, they're given watch. But some people might not appreciate the watch and say, but I don't need the watch. Maybe it would have been better if they just gave it in cash, or maybe it was maybe the reward is I can appreciate the reward more if it were a cell phone instead of a watch, something like that. So sometimes our culture influences now how we value rewards. So that's a challenge. So later on, when you will be working already, okay, and you're in charge of designing the compensation scheme of the company, or the rewarding scheme of the company, remember that not everyone views rewards in the same manner. Moving on, I mentioned earlier that it's also important for us to remember that due to differences of culture, we might encounter some problems. And so, our goal is to make sure that despite differences in culture, there should still be, for example, shared culture. Okay, so while we respect that there may be differences in terms of how we do things at work and so on, still there should be shared values, shared beliefs, and shared norms. So when we talk about organizational culture, just for us to remember this is how things are done in a company. So while there may be differences, okay, brought about perhaps by religion or education, we have to inculcate in our employees that at least man lang sana the company's values, beliefs, and norms are shared across despite the country where we operate. Okay, so why does culture matter in global business? Of course, I'm sure you know the answer. Having this would actually help us build identity. Okay. However, as I've said, it's still important that we emphasize the importance of having shared culture. Why? Because this will help us align employees worldwide despite differences in their background, in their culture. Okay. It will be easier for us to guide behavior without much differences when it comes now to rules and regulations, or without having to implement harsh rules or punishments. What's important is when people in your company, regardless of what country they operate in, okay, or regardless of which company, okay, they belong to, if you're operating globally, share the same values, beliefs, and norms so that you can easily guide their behavior. So it's also important to emphasize having strong culture. When the company has strong culture, it's easier to emphasize the importance also of shared values. And this will also now lead to clear identity. When your culture is weak, this may now lead to inconsistent behavior and also problems on confusion. The challenge here is how you're going now to manage cultural diversity. Imagine you are a Filipino manager working in an American owned hotel in the United Arab Emirates, and you are in charge of employees coming from different countries around the world. If the company does not emphasize the importance of shared culture, you will definitely have a hard time. Okay? Again, imagine you're a Filipino manager, meaning you're from the Philippines but you were hired in UAE, or maybe in Abu Dhabi, for example, in one of those hotels in Abu Dhabi, for example. So that means that you're working abroad in an American owned hotel operating in Abu Dhabi, UAE. And when we look at your organizational structure, you are actually handling employees coming from different countries around the world. So in short, how many cultures are we talking about here? Your culture as a Filipino, the culture of the company which was established in the US. Okay, the owner is an American, but that hotel is operating in UAE. So there's another culture here, no? The culture in UAE, the culture in Middle East, and then several workers under your wing, and they are coming from different countries around the world, maybe employees coming from Pakistan, India, Singapore, China. Maybe you also have employees coming from Italy, from France, from Spain. Maybe you also have employees coming from Mexico, because UAE is also a melting pot, so expect that already, 'di ba? So how many cultures are we talking about here? So if we do not have shared culture within the organization, you as the manager will definitely have difficulty managing the organization and your people. And again, you cannot simply say, I am a Filipino, I'll follow my culture, you better follow mine, you better respect mine because I'm your boss. You cannot do that. Okay, it will just cause conflict and problems across the company. And the last one, I mentioned another factor we consider must be on organizational change. So we cannot avoid change. It will definitely be there. We always say that if there's something that is permanent, it is change. So change is always possible. Now, since we cannot stop change from happening, we have to be able to adapt to this change. Okay, regardless of the condition that we are currently in. So why is change needed? Why is change needed? And when do we expect it, by the way? So change is needed because of global competition. You cannot remain the same if competition requires you to be different. Okay, therefore, there's no other choice but to be different if you want to win the competition. Why is change needed? Change is needed because of technology, and we know very well that technology does not remain stagnant. Technology is one of those dynamic things, no, that we have to deal with. It's always changing. It's constantly changing. You buy one technology today, tomorrow it's already obsolete. Change is needed because of political and economic shifts. Because of political and economic shifts. So new regulations, new laws, for example, would now require change. Okay. What else? Let's say, for instance, changes also in the economy, which we have experienced for the past few weeks, right? It's not only a problem in the Philippines, it's a problem in many different countries around the world. Economic shifts brought about by what's happening in the Middle East, for example. So you cannot just say, oh, it's okay. That's that's temporary. No need to change, of course not. Okay? There's a need for change. And then different forms of crisis. For example, crisis brought about by pandemic, crisis brought about by climate-related problems, crisis brought about by conflicts. So there can be many conflicts that you may also face later on, and remaining the same may not be the best option. And therefore, we have to remember that we have to adapt now to change. However, perhaps one of the reasons why it's quite difficult also to immediately adapt to changes is because there are different types of changes that we encounter. So there could be strategic changes which may be required by new markets, new products. There could be a structural change, and there must be, let's say, for example, reorganization in the company. There may be cultural changes which are probably brought about by changing values, behavior. And lastly, we might have to deal with technological change because of all this digital transformation that we are also experiencing. So it's important that despite all those, we're able now to adjust. Of course, there will always be some challenges in this aspect, like, for example, resistance. Not all people may be ready with change, so they resist it. Okay. Another problem in adapting to change may be brought about by cultural barriers. And then another challenge in adapting to change would be brought about by coordination across countries. So, if you were managing a Philippine company that is expanding globally, what then will you now prioritize? Structure, culture, or control systems? So, something to think about as we end today's session.